Ominous music swells, a clock ticks, then a gunshot echoes. In the shadowed halls of Stony Gates, a grand estate turned haven for troubled youths, death stalks the innocent. 2 murders, a stolen sapphire, and a web of lies draw Miss Jane Marple into a maze of greed and betrayal. Who hides behind the estate's deceptive mirrors? Is it Ruth, the sister with a bitter grudge, or another cloaked in lavender-scented secrets? As clues unravel hidden ledgers, secret passages, poisoned herbs, Miss Marple's quiet gaze pierces the darkness. Can she unmask the killer before another life is lost? Music fades to a tense note. Dive into mirrors of deception, where every reflection holds a truth, or a deadly lie. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Stonigatist. Autumn wind carried a whisper of unease as it rustled through the elms lining the lane to Stonigates. Miss Jane Marple, bundled in her favourite woolen shawl, sat by the window of her cosy St. Mary Mead cottage, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. The morning post had brought an unexpected letter, its cream envelope embossed with the elegant crest of her old school friend, Carrie Louise Septiercold. The sight of it stirred a flicker of nostalgia and curiosity. Carrie's letters were rare, always warm, but this one bore a hurried script that hinted at something amiss. Miss Marple slit the envelope with a silver letter opener, her sharp eyes scanning the words. Carrie's tone was as affectionate as ever, but beneath the pleasantries lay a shadow. "My dear Jane," it began, "I find myself in need of your quiet wisdom. Stonygates is not as it once was. There's a strangeness here, a feeling I cannot quite name. Would you come? Your presence would be a comfort." The invitation was clear, yet the vagueness of Carrie's words pricked at Miss Marple's instincts. She set the letter down, her mind already threading through possibilities. Stonygates, once a grand family estate, was now a rehabilitation centre for troubled youths, a project dear to Carrie's heart. But what could trouble her so? By noon, Miss Marple had packed a modest valise and arranged for her neighbour, Mrs. Bantry, to water her geraniums. The train to Market Basing chugged through patchwork fields, and as the countryside unfolded, Miss Marple's thoughts wandered to Carrie Louise. They had been girls together at a finishing school in Florence, where Carrie's dreamy idealism had charmed everyone, even the sternest of governesses. Now in her 60s, Carrie remained, Miss Marple suspected, as trusting as ever, a quality both endearing and dangerous. The station at Market Basing was a sleepy affair, with a single porter dozing under a faded timetable. A car awaited her, driven by a wiry young man with a mop of dark curls and a guarded expression. "Miss Marple, I'm Tom, from Stonygates," he said, tipping his cap. His accent carried a trace of London's East End, and his eyes darted to the rearview mirror. As they set off, "Mrs. Sir Eccles eager to see you. Been talking about you all week." "That's kind of her," Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle but probing. "And how do you find Stonygates, Tom?" He hesitated, gripping the wheel a fraction tighter. "It's different. Lots of folks coming and going. Some of 'em don't much like being there." His words hung in the air, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in his voice. She did not press him further, but her mind catalogued the detail. A driver uneasy about his own workplace. The approach to Stonygates was a study in contrasts. The estate's iron gates, rusted but stately, opened onto a drive flanked by ancient yews. The house itself loomed ahead, a Gothic pile of grey stone with ivy clinging to its turrets. Yet the grounds buzzed with modern life, young men in overalls raked leaves, while others carried books or tools. their faces a mix of defiance and hope. Carrie's vision, Miss Marple recalled, was to reform these youths through education and purpose. But the air held attention, as if the house itself were watching. Carrie Louise greeted her at the door, her silver hair swept into a loose bun, her blue eyes as warm as Miss Marple remembered. "Jane, you haven't changed a bit," she exclaimed, embracing her friend. Her voice was light, but her hands trembled slightly, betraying a nervousness Miss Marple did not miss. "You're too kind, Carrie," Miss Marple said, smiling, "but I suspect Stonegates has changed a great deal." Carrie's laugh was soft, almost fragile. "Oh, it's a whirlwind now. Come, let me show you to your room." As they climbed the grand staircase, Carrie chattered about the centre's progress classes in literature, carpentry workshops, even a small theatre troupe. Yet her words felt rehearsed, as if she were avoiding a deeper truth. The guest room was charming, with a four-poster bed and a window overlooking the rose garden. As Carrie left to arrange tea, Miss Marple unpacked her thoughts on that letter. A strangeness, Carrie had said. Not danger, not yet, but something unsettling enough to summon an old friend. She glanced at the garden below, where a young man, in a patched jacket, lingered near the roses, his posture furtive. He looked up, caught her eye, and slipped away into the shrubbery. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Curious behaviour for a gardener. Tea was served in the drawing-room, a vast space with velvet drapes and a crackling fire. Carrie introduced her family and staff, each a distinct thread in the tapestry of Stonegates. There was Alex Carrie's stepson from her first marriage, a handsome man in his 30s with a quick smile and eyes that never quite met anyone's gaze. "Delighted to meet you, Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth as polished wood. "Carrie says you're a marvel at solving puzzles." "Only the human kind," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild but her eyes sharp. Alex's charm felt practiced, like an actor playing a role. Next was Mr. Edgar Ruckled, the centre's administrator, a gaunt man with a scholar's stoop and a habit of adjusting his spectacles. "We're doing vital work here," he said, his voice earnest, but clipped. "These boys need structure, not coddling." His intensity struck Miss Marple as oddly defensive, as if he anticipated criticism. Gina, Carrie's granddaughter, was a vibrant contrast, a young woman with dark curls and a laugh that filled the room. "Grandmama says you're a detective." "In disguise," she teased, offering Miss Marple a scone. "Have you come to catch our ghosts?" "Ghosts?" Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, her knitting needles pausing. "Oh, just silly stories," Gina said, waving a hand. "The boys swear. They hear footsteps in the attics at night." Carrie smiled, but her eyes flickered with unease. "Old houses creak, Gina, you know that." As tea continued, Miss Marple observed the dynamics. Alex and Sericold exchanged terse glances, while Gina flitted between them, her cheer masking a subtle watchfulness. The conversation turned to the centre's funding, and Sericold's voice grew sharp. "We've had to tighten our belts," he said. "Some donors are unreliable." "Money always complicates things," Alex remarked, his tone light but pointed. Miss Marple noted the undercurrent, filing it away like a skein of wool. As the afternoon waned, Carrie suggested a walk through the grounds, but Miss Marple demurred, citing the chill. In truth, she wanted a moment alone to think. She excused herself to the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound volumes. There, she found a young maid, Elsie, dusting the shelves with a distracted air. Her hands shook as she worked, and her eyes darted to the door. "Good afternoon, Elsie," Miss Marple said gently. "You seem troubled. Is everything all right?" Elsie started, nearly dropping her cloth. "Oh, ma'am, it's nothing. Just this house. It's so big, and sometimes I hear things." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Voices, late at night, in the West Wing. They're not the boys, I know. They're voices." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her mind sharpened. "Voices can be deceiving," she said. "Perhaps it's just the wind." Elsie shook her head, her face pale. "No, ma'am, it's words, clear as day. Last night I heard someone say it's hidden where no one looks. I didn't dare stay to hear more." Miss Marple patted her hand. "You were wise to tell me, Elsie. I'll keep an ear out." As the maid hurried off, Miss Marple sat by the library window, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. Elsie's story was intriguing, but it was the girl's fear that struck her most. Fear, in Miss Marple's experience, was a reliable compass, pointing toward truth. Dinner that evening was a formal affair, with candlelight glinting off crystal. The conversation was polite but strained, as if each person were guarding a secret. Alex recounted a theatrical project he was funding for the boys, his enthusiasm almost convincing. Serocold spoke of new reforms, his words clipped and precise. Gina teased them both, her laughter a bright note in the tension. Carrie, however, was quieter than usual, her gaze drifting to the tall windows where moonlight cast eerie shadows as the meal ended. Miss Marple excused herself early, claiming fatigue. In her room, she sat by the window, her knitting untouched. Elsie's words echoed in her mind, hidden where no one looks. It was a clue, however vague, and Miss Marple's village instincts told her it was no mere fancy. She recalled the young man in the garden, the guarded looks at dinner, and Carrie's trembling hands. Stony Gates was a house of mirrors, reflecting truths that were not what they seemed. Her eyes fell on the bedside table, where a small brass figurina shepherdess stood slightly askew. She hadn't noticed it earlier, but now it seemed out of place, its base not quite flush with the table. Curious, she lifted it, revealing a faint scratch on the wood, as if something had been pressed beneath. A quick inspection showed no hidden compartment, but the figurine's weight felt wrong to light for solid brass. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. Someone had tampered with it, perhaps to conceal something small but significant. She replaced the figurine exactly as she found it, her mind alight with possibilities. The evening's observations, Elsie's whispered confession, and now this. Tiny anomaly formed a pattern, faint but unmistakable. Stony Gates held secrets, and Miss Marple was determined to unravel them. For now, she had a starting point, a maid's fear and a figurine that lied about its weight. It was enough to keep her awake, her thoughts as sharp as her knitting needles, stitching together the first threads of a mystery. Chapter 2. Shadows in the hall. The morning sun filtered through the mullioned windows of Stony Gates, casting dappled patterns across the oak-panelled hall where Miss Jane Marple stood, her knitting tucked under one arm, after a restless night, pondering Elsie's whispered tale of voices and the peculiarly light brass figurine. She had risen early, determined to explore the estate's pulse. Stony Gates was awake, its corridors alive with the clatter of breakfast trays and the muffled laughter of the young residents heading to their morning classes. Yet, beneath the bustle, Miss Marple sensed a current of secrecy, like a melody played in a minor key, Carrie Louise had promised a tour of the grounds after breakfast, and Miss Marple joined her friend in the morning room, where a spread of toast, marmalade, and steaming tea awaited. Carrie's smile was warm, but her eyes held a flicker of distraction. "I thought you'd like to see what we've built here, Jane," she said, pouring tea with a delicate hand. "The boys are thriving, truly. It's a new beginning for them." "I'm eager to see it," Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle but her gaze sharp, noting the slight tremor in Carrie's fingers. "It's remarkable what you've done, though I imagine it's not without its challenges." Carrie's laugh was soft, almost brittle. "Oh, there are always challenges. Young spirits, old grudges. But we manage." Her words trailed off, and Miss Marple filed away the hint of old grudges for later consideration. The tour began in the East Wing, where classrooms hummed with activity. Miss Marple observed the boys, some scribbling in notebooks, others carving wood in a workshop, their faces a mix of focus and guarded hope. The head tutor, a wiry man named Mr. Finch, guided them through, his voice brimming with pride. "We teach more than books here," he said, gesturing to a boy sketching a detailed landscape. "We teach them to trust themselves again." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes lingering on a boy at the back, his pencil idle, his gaze fixed on the window. He was older than the others, with a scar above one eyebrow and a posture that suggested readiness to flee. "That young man seems preoccupied," she remarked to Finch. "Oh, that's Daniel," Finch said, lowering his voice. "A bright lad, but he keeps to himself. Came to us after a rough patch in London. He's adjusting," Miss Marple noted, the teacher's careful tone, as if Daniel's story held more than he let on. The tour continued to the library, where Miss Marple had met Elsie the previous day. Now, in daylight, the room seemed less foreboding, its shelves gleaming with polished leather. Yet Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a portrait above the fireplace, a stern-faced woman in Victorian dress, her eyes seeming to follow every movement. "That's my grat-aunt, Lavinia," Carrie said, noticing her friend's interest. "She built Stony Gates, a formidable woman, by all accounts." "Formidable indeed," Miss Marple murmured, noting the portrait's heavy frame, slightly askew as if recently touched. She made a mental note to inspect it later, suspecting it might conceal more than family pride. As they moved to the West Wing, the atmosphere shifted. The corridors grew narrower, the air cooler, and the sounds of the center faded. Carrie explained that this wing housed the staff quarters and storage rooms, rarely used by the boys. Miss Marple's steps slowed as they passed a heavy oak door, its brass lock gleaming anew. "This looks recently polished," she observed, her tone casual. Carrie hesitated. "Oh, that's just the old music room. We keep it locked now too. Many instruments went missing." Her explanation was quick, but Miss Marple caught the fleeting glance toward Mr. Satterfield, who had joined them silently, his spectacles glinting in the dim light. "It's practical to secure valuables," said, his voice clipped. "The boys can be impulsive." His words were reasonable, but Miss Marple sensed a guardedness, as if the locked door held more than dusty violins. The tour ended in the rose garden, where the air was sweet with late blooms. Gina, Carrie's granddaughter, joined them, her dark curls bouncing as she recounted a theatrical rehearsal she was organizing. "The boys are staging The Tempest," she said, her eyes bright. "You must come, Miss Marple. It's chaos, but the good kind." "I wouldn't miss it, Miss Marple replied, smiling, though her mind lingered on the locked door and Daniel's distant gaze. As Gina chattered, Miss Marple noticed a groundskeeper pruning roses nearby, his movements deliberate but his eyes darting toward their group. He was the same young man she'd seen from her window the previous day, his patched jacket unmistakable. Dinner that evening was a lively affair, held in the grand dining hall with its vaulted ceiling and chandeliers casting a warm glow. The table was crowded with Carrie's family, staff, and a few senior boys invited as a privilege. Alex Risteric, Carrie's stepson, dominated the conversation, regaling them with tales of his travels in Italy. His charm was infectious, but Miss Marple noted how his anecdotes skirted personal details, as if he were painting a portrait with deliberate omissions. Terracles, seated opposite, was less effusive, his comments focused on the centre's budget. "We've had to make cuts," he said, slicing his roast with precision. "Some of our benefactors have withdrawn support. It's a delicate balance, keeping this place afloat." Alex leaned back, his smile sharp. "Money's always the root of trouble, isn't it? Perhaps we should sell Gratant Lavinia's portrait. It's probably worth a fortune." Carrie laughed, but it was strained. "Oh, Alex, don't be absurd. That portrait's been here forever." Miss Marple's ears pricked at the mention of the portrait. Her suspicions about its frame deepening. Gina changed the subject, asking the boys about their play, but the conversation soon faltered as Sarah and Alex exchanged pointed remarks about funding priorities. Miss Marple listened, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap, her eyes moving from face to face. The tension was palpable, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. As dessert was served a delicate lemon tart, Miss Marple excused herself to the powder room, but her true destination was the West Wing. The corridors were silent now, the house settling into its evening rhythm. She paused at the locked music room door, her fingers brushing the polished brass. The lock was new, its shine out of place in the faded grandeur. She bent closer, her sharp eyes catching a faint scratch near the keyhole, as if someone had fumbled with a tool. A soft creak behind her made her turn. It was Daniel, the boy from the classroom, his scar catching the moonlight. "You shouldn't be here, ma'am," he said, his voice low but not unkind. "This wing's off limits after dark." Miss Marple smiled unruffled. "I must have taken a wrong turn, Daniel. But since you're here, perhaps you can tell me about this music room. It seems rather special." His eyes narrowed, but he answered carefully. "Nothing special about it. Just old junk. Mr. Sarucald says it's not safe." He shifted, his hands in his pockets, and Miss Marple noted the faint bulge, as if he carried something heavy. "Thank you, Daniel," she said, her tone warm. "You're very helpful." As he slipped away, she lingered, her mind racing. The scratched lock, Daniel's presence, and Sericald's insistence on security pointed to something hidden, perhaps the it Elsie had overheard. Hidden where? No one looks. Returning to her room, Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting untouched. The night was still, but the house seemed to hum with secrets. She recalled the portrait's crooked frame, the locked doors, fresh scratches, and Daniel's guarded demeanor. Each was a thread in a tapestry she was beginning to weave. The music room, she suspected, was keynote for its instruments, but for what it concealed. A ledger, perhaps, or papers tied to Sericald's funding woes, or something more personal, tied to the old grudges Carrie had mentioned as she prepared for bed. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the figurine in her room, its deceptive weight a clue she hadn't yet unraveled. But the music room was a more immediate puzzle. Its lock was new, its purpose obscured, and Daniel's late-night presence suggested he knew more than he let on. She resolved to investigate further, perhaps with Gina's help, as the girl's lively curiosity could open doors, literal and figurative. The chapter closed with Miss Marple slipping under the covers, her mind as alert as ever. The scratched lock was her mini triumph, a tangible clue that confirmed her instincts. Stony Gates was a house of secrets, and the music room held one worth guarding. As sleep beckoned, she smiled faintly, her thoughts already stitching together the next steps in her quiet, relentless pursuit of truth. Chapter 3. The Shot in the Dark. The clock in Stony Gate's great hall struck midnight, its chimes reverberating through the silent house like a warning. Miss Jane Marple, still awake in her guest room, paused her knitting, her ears attuned to the night. The unease she'd sensed since arriving stirred by Elsie's tale of voices. The tampered figurine and the scratched lock on the music room door had kept sleep at bay. Now, as the final chime faded, a sharp crack split the air. A gunshot, unmistakable, echoed from the heart of the estate. Miss Marple rose swiftly, slipping on her dressing gown and seizing her torch. The house was stirring, footsteps clattering in the corridors, voices rising in alarm. She stepped into the hallway, where Gina, her dark curls wild, appeared in a silk robe. "Miss Marple, did you hear that?" she whispered, her eyes wide. It came from downstairs. "I did," Miss Marple replied, her voice calm but firm. "Stay close, Gina. We must see what's happened." Her mind was already racing, cataloguing possibilities. A gunshot at midnight was no accident, not in a house brimming with secrets. They descended the grand staircase, joining a growing knot of residents and staff in the entrance hall. Carrie Louise, pale but composed, stood by the library door, her hands clasped tightly. Alex Risteric, his usual charm replaced by a taut expression, was barking orders to a group of boys to stay back. Mr. Freckled, his spectacles askew, emerged from the study, his face ashen. "It's all right," he called, his voice unsteady. "No one's hurt. Just a misunderstanding." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Sericald's reassurance felt too quick, too polished. She slipped past him into the study, Gina trailing behind. The room was dimly lit, its heavy curtains drawn, but the air held a faint, acrid tang. On the floor, sprawled near a mahogany desk, lay a man in a dark overcoat, his face turned away. A revolver rested inches from his hand, and a dark pool spread beneath him. Miss Marple knelt, careful not to disturb the scene, and confirmed what her instincts already knew. He was dead, shot through the chest. Gina gasped, clutching Miss Marple's arm. "Who is he? Oh heavens, what's happening?" Before Miss Marple could respond, Alex pushed into the room, his face grim. "That's Grayson," he said, his voice low. "A private investigator. He arrived yesterday, poking around about the center's finances." His eyes flicked to Sericald, who stood frozen in the doorway. Miss Marple rose, her expression serene, but her mind a whirl of questions. A private investigator dead in the study, moments after a shot aimed at or meant to seem aimed at. The timing was too precise, the scene too staged. She glanced at the revolver, noting its polished grip, free of dust or wear. "We must call the police," she said mildly, "and no one should touch anything." Sericald nodded, already moving to the telephone, but Miss Marple caught the slight tremor in his hands. As the household waited for the authorities, she drew Gina aside, her voice low. "Gina, did you see anyone near the study before the shot?" Gina shook her head, her lips trembling. "No, but I was in my room, reading. I heard the shot and ran down." "Oh, Miss Marple, do you think someone meant to kill Mr. Sericold?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone thoughtful. "Or perhaps the target was Mr. Grayson himself." She patted Gina's hand, her eyes scanning the room. The study was a treasure trove of potential clues. A cluttered desk with scattered papers, a bookshelf lined with dusty tomes, and a tall window slightly ajar, letting in a chill breeze. She made a mental note to inspect it later. The police arrived. Swiftly, led by Inspector Curry, a brisk man with a not-nonsense air. He cordoned off the study, taking statements from the household. Miss Marple lingered nearby, her knitting resumed as a pretext to listen. Sericold claimed he'd been working late in the study when the shot rang out, narrowly missing him. He'd seen no one, heard nothing but the blast. Alex, however, admitted to passing the study earlier, though he insisted he'd retired too. His room by midnight. Carrie Louise, distressed, could only say she'd been asleep until the noise woke her. Miss Marple's attention shifted to the boys, huddled in a corner under Mr. Finch's supervision. Among them was Daniel, the scarred youth from the classroom, his eyes fixed on the floor. She approached, her smile disarming. "Daniel, you're a perceptive young man. Did you happen to notice anything unusual tonight?" He hesitated, his fingers twitching in his pockets. "I was in the dormitory," he said, his voice low, "but I couldn't sleep. I went to the window for some air, and I saw someone moving near the study outside, by the yew hedge. They were limping like they'd hurt their leg." Miss Marple eyes gleamed. "Limping, you say? How interesting. Could you tell if it was a man or a woman?" Daniel shook his head. "Too dark, but they moved fast, like they didn't want to be seen." He glanced nervously at Finch, who was ushering the boys back to their rooms. "Thank you, Daniel," Miss Marple said, her tone warm but her mind racing. A limping figure by the yew hedge, a dead investigator, and a shot that spared the pieces didn't yet fit. But Daniel's observation was a thread she could pull as the police continued their work. Miss Marple slipped back into the study, permitted by Inspector Curry, who respected her reputation. She examined the scene, with care, noting the window's latch, unhooked but not forced. The papers on the desk were financial records, some marked with cryptic initials RLR-ES. She recognized Alex's and Sericold's initials, but RL was a mystery. A single sheet, half tucked under a blotter, caught her eye. It was a receipt for a locksmith, dated 2 days prior, for the music room door. Her lips curved faintly. The scratched lock from the west wing, now tied to a recent locksmith visit. It suggested someone had needed access or needed to prevent it. She tucked the receipt back, ensuring no one saw, and turned her attention to the revolver. Its position seemed to perfect, as if placed for effect. A staged suicide, perhaps, but Grayson's role as an investigator made that unlikely. Someone had wanted him silenced. As dawn broke, the police removed Grayson's body, and the household dispersed, shaken but subdued. Miss Marple joined Carrie Louise in the morning room, where tea was served to steady frayed nerves. Carrie's hands shook as she poured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jane, I never imagined such a thing could happen here. Grayson was only meant to audit our books. Who would do this?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene. "People act for all sorts of reasons, Carrie. Greed, fear, revenge. We'll find the truth. Her words were gentle, but her mind was fixed on the limping figure. In her village experience, physical quirks often betrayed identity. Old Mr. Tuttle's shuffle, Widow Crane's hobble. Someone at Stonygates had a limp, or had faked one. Gina entered, her face pale but determined. "Miss Marple, I overheard something earlier tonight, before the shot. I didn't think much of it then, but—" She hesitated, glancing at Carrie. It was Alex, in the hall, talking to someone on the telephone. He sounded angry, said something about keeping it buried or we're all finished. Carrie gasped, but Miss Marple merely nodded. "Thank you, Gina. That's very helpful." She made no further comment, but her thoughts spun. Alex's cryptic call, the locksmith receipt, and Daniel's limping figure formed a pattern, faint but growing. Clearer. Grayson's death was no random act, it was tied to the secrets Stonygates held. Perhaps in that locked music room. As the morning progressed, Miss Marple excused herself to walk the grounds, her torch in hand. Despite the daylight, she found the yew hedge Daniel had mentioned, its dense branches perfect for concealment. Kneeling, she spotted a faint imprint in the soiler boot, its heel worn unevenly, suggesting a limp. It was a small clue, but in Miss Marple's hands, small clues were like seeds, destined to grow. Returning to the house, she paused by the portrait of Lavinia in the library, its frame still askew. She resisted the urge to touch it, aware that eyes might be watching. Instead, she sat with her knitting, her mind stitching together the night's events. Grayson's death had shifted the mystery into sharp focus, but the limping figure was her triumph for now, a clue that pointed to someone specific, someone who had moved through the dark with purpose. The chapter closed with Miss Marple in her room, the dawn light softening the edges of Stonygate's grim night. She set her knitting aside, her thoughts on the bootprint and the receipt. The music room, she suspected, held the key to Grayson's investigation and his death. Tomorrow she would find a way to explore it, perhaps with Daniel's unwitting help. For now, she had a name to pursue, RL, and a gate to identify. The shadows of Stonygates were deepening, but Miss Marple's quiet resolve burned brighter still. Chapter 4. The mirrors tricked the morning after the gunshot that claimed Mr. Grayson's life. Stonygates wore a veil of unease, its grand halls hushed as if mourning the violation of its peace. Miss Jane Marple sat in the morning room, her knitting needles clicking softly, her eyes scanning the faces of the household over breakfast. The shock of the murder lingered. Carrie Louise's hands trembled as she buttered her toast. Alex Ristaric's usual charm was subdued, and Mr. Saracol's gaze darted to the windows, as if expecting another calamity. Gina, however, maintained a defiant brightness, chatting about the boys' theatre rehearsals to lift the mood. Miss Marple listened, her mind weaving together the threads from the previous night, the limping figure by the yew hedge, the locksmith's receipt, and Alex's cryptic telephone call about keeping it buried. Determined to unravel the mystery, Miss Marple excused herself after breakfast, claiming a need for fresh air. In truth, she intended to revisit the study where Grayson had died. Inspector Curry had left a constable to guard the room, but the young officer, recognizing Miss Marple's reputation, allowed her a brief look under the pretense of retrieving a dropped knitting needle. The study was as she'd left it, papers scattered on the desk, the window still slightly ajar, and the revolver's absence noted by a chalk outline on the floor. But what drew her attention was a large, ornate mirror above the fireplace, its gilded frame catching the morning light in a way that seemed almost deliberate. Miss Marple approached the mirror, her reflection framed by its intricate carvings. It was an imposing piece, nearly 6 feet tall, but its placement struck her as too low for decoration, too prominent for utility. She ran a finger along the frame, feeling a faint seam where the wood met the wall. A gentle press revealed nothing but her village instincts, honed by years of observing the subtle quirks of St. Mary Mead, told her the mirror was more than it seemed. She recalled Elsie's whispered words about something hidden where no one looks. Could the mirror be a clue? As she pondered, footsteps announced Gina's arrival. "Miss Marple, you're sleuthing already," she teased, her voice a mix of admiration and nerves. "Find anything interesting?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild. "This mirror is rather striking, don't you think?" "It seems." To command the room, Gina tilted her head, studying it. "It's been here forever. Grandmama says it was Great-Aunt Lavinia's pride and joy. I always thought it was a bit creepy, like it's watching you." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Mirrors can be deceptive, Gina. They show us what we expect to see, but sometimes they hide more than they reveal." She filed away Gina's comment about Lavinia, noting the connection to the portrait in the library. 2 family heirlooms, both potentially concealing secrets. Leaving the study, Miss Marple suggested a walk to the library, hoping to inspect the portrait of Lavinia again. Gina agreed, eager to escape the house's oppressive mood. The library was quiet, save for the soft rustle of pages as Mr. Finch prepared lesson plans. The portrait loomed above the fireplace, Lavinia's stern gaze as piercing as ever. Miss Marple studied the frame, noting its slight tilt, unchanged since yesterday. She resisted the urge to adjust it, aware that any tampering might alert the wrong eyes. "Mr. Finch," she said, turning to the tutor, "do you know much about this portrait? It's quite a presence." Finch glanced up, adjusting his glasses. "Oh, Lavinia. She's a bit of a legend here. Built stony gates with an iron will, they say. That frame's solid oak took 3 men to hang it. The boys think it's haunted." He chuckled, but his eyes flickered nervously. "Haunted or not, it's a fine piece," Miss Marple said, her tone disarming. She made a mental note of the frame's weight too heavy to shift easily, yet askew. Someone had touched it, and recently, as Gina chatted with Finch about the boy's progress, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to Grayson. Alex had called him a private investigator, hired to audit the center's finances. His death suggested he'd uncovered something dangerous, perhaps tied to the initials RL on the study's papers or the locked music room. She needed more information about Grayson's purpose, and the boys, with their sharp eyes and loose tongues, might hold the key. She found Daniel, the scarred youth, in the carpentry workshop, sanding a wooden chair with focused precision. His solitude gave her an opening. "Good morning, Daniel," she said, settling on a nearby stool. "You have a steady hand. Did you learn that here?" He glanced up, wary but not hostile. "Back in London, ma'am. My uncle was a carpenter. Taught me a bit before things went wrong." His voice was guarded, but Miss Marple sensed an opportunity. "I heard Mr. Grayson was looking into the center's accounts," she said casually. "Did he ever speak to you about his work?" Daniel's hand paused, the sandpaper hovering. He asked questions. Wanted to know about the boys, who came and went, who handled the money. I told him to talk to Mr. Sericold. He didn't like that. His eyes met hers briefly, then dropped. He was in the library a lot, looking at old records. Miss Marple nodded, her knitting resuming its rhythm. Old records can be fascinating. Did he mention anything specific? A name, perhaps? Daniel hesitated, then leaned closer. He asked about someone called Ruth, said she might know something about missing funds. I didn't know who he meant. He returned to his sanding, his movements brisker, as if eager to end the conversation. Thank you, Daniel, Miss Marple said, rising. Ruth R.L., perhaps? The initials from the study's papers now had a name, and it pointed to a new thread in the tapestry of Stonegate's secrets. That afternoon, Miss Marple joined Carrie Louise for tea in the conservatory, a glass-walled haven filled with ferns and the scent of damp earth. Carrie seemed more herself, though her eyes still held a shadow of worry. Jane, you're awfully quiet, she said, offering a biscuit. Are you thinking about poor Mr. Grayson? I'm thinking about many things, Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle. Carrie, do you know anyone named Ruth connected to Stonegates? Carrie's cup paused midway to her lips. Ruth, why, that's my sister. She lives in London now, but she visited a few months ago. Why do you ask? Miss Marple chose her words carefully. Mr. Grayson's inquiries seemed to have touched on family matters. I wondered if Ruth might know something about the centres. Finances. Carrie frowned, her fingers tightening on the cup. Ruth's never been involved with the centre. She's distant, always has been. But she did ask about our donors once, said she knew someone who might help. Her voice faltered, as if the memory unsettled her. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Ruth, the limping figure, the locked music room, and now Grayson's interest in her. The pieces were aligning, but the picture remained incomplete. She needed to see Grayson's belongings, which the police had catalogued but not yet removed. With Inspector Curry's permission, she visited the guest room where Grayson had stayed. His suitcase lay open, revealing neatly folded clothes and a notebook. She flipped through it, finding cryptic entries. RL Check Trust Fund, music room access restricted, and, most intriguingly, mirrors of deception. The phrase sent a chill through her. It echoed Elsie's overheard words, suggesting Grayson had been close to uncovering something, hidden perhaps behind the study's mirror. As she closed the notebook, a folded paper slipped out, a map of ground floor with the study and music rooms circled. A small mark indicated a point behind the study's fireplace, where the mirror hung. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The mirror was no mere decoration, was a doorway, literal or figurative, to the truth. Returning to the study, she examined the mirror again, this time alone. She pressed the frame's seam, feeling a faint click. The mirror swung inward slightly, revealing a narrow recess. Inside was a small ledger, its pages filled with transactions, large sums marked with initials. Including RL and AR, the amounts were staggering, far beyond the centre's public budget, and several entries were dated just before Grayson's arrival. Miss Marple closed the recess, her heart steady but her mind alight. The ledger was a breakthrough, proof of financial misconduct that Grayson had died for. But who had hidden it, and why? Ruth's name loomed large, but Alex's initials were there too, and Saracol's defensive demeanor suggested he knew more than he admitted. As evening fell, Miss Marple joined the household for a subdued dinner, the weight of Grayson's death heavy in the air. Alex was absent, claiming a headache, and Saracol spoke little, his eyes fixed on his plate. Gina tried to lighten the mood, but even her laughter felt forced. Miss Marple observed them all, her knitting a quiet rhythm in her lap. The ledger's discovery was her triumph for an hour, concrete clue that pointed to embezzlement and a motive for murder. The chapter closed with Miss Marple in her room, the ledger's secrets burning in her mind. She resolved to confront Ruth's connection to Stonygates, perhaps through Carrie, and to investigate the music room further. The mirror had yielded its truth, but others remained, reflecting lies that only her quiet persistence could shatter. As she drifted towards sleep, the phrase "mirrors of deception" echoed, a promise of more revelations to come. Chapter 5. Secrets in the Ledger. The air at Stonygates carried a chill sharper than the autumn breeze. As if the house itself mourned the death of Mr. Grayson, the private investigator shot in the study 2 nights prior. Miss Jane Marple sat in her guest room, her knitting needles idle as she pored over the mental tapestry of clues. The hidden ledger behind the study's mirror, inscribed with cryptic initials and staggering sums. The limping figure seen by Daniel near the yew hedge. And the name Ruth Carey, Louisa's sister, linked to Grayson's inquiries. The ledger, with its evidence of financial misconduct, had confirmed Miss Marple's suspicions of a deeper conspiracy, but it raised more questions than answers. Who was siphoning funds, and why had Grayson paid with his life? Determined to unravel the thread of Ruth's involvement, Miss Marple joined Carrie Louise for breakfast in the dining hall, where the household gathered under a pall of unease. Alex Restrick, his charm frayed, sipped coffee in silence, while Mr. Sericold's sharp glances betrayed his tension. Gina, ever the bright spark, tried to rally the group with plans for the boys' upcoming theatre performance, but her voice faltered under the weight of recent events. Miss Marple observed them all, her serene expression masking a mind as keen as a needle. "Carrie," she said, buttering a scone with deliberate care, "you mentioned Ruth visited a few months ago. Did she show much interest in the centres?" "Work." Carrie's fork paused, her eyes clouding. "Not really, Jane. Ruth's always been detached. She asked about our donors, but it was fleeting. She's more at home in London's salons than here." Her tone held a trace of sadness, and Miss Marple noted it, sensing a family rift that might hold the key to Ruth's initials in the ledger. Before she could probe further, a commotion erupted outside. A young boy, breathless and wide-eyed, burst into the hall. "It's Mr. Finch," he cried. "He's in the garden, he's not moving." The room froze, then erupted into motion. Miss Marple followed the rush to the rose garden, where Mr. Finch, the head tutor, lay slumped beside a stone bench, his face grey, a cup shattered at his side. Gina knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she checked his pulse. "He's gone," she whispered, tears welling. "Oh, Miss Marple, what's happening to us?" Miss Marple's heart sank, but her mind sharpened. 2 deaths in as many days, shooting and now Finch's collapse, were no coincidence. She knelt, her eyes scanning the scene. The cup's remnants held a faint, bitter scent, not unlike almonds. Poison, she suspected, and a swift one. The garden was quiet, save for the rustle of leaves, but her gaze fell on a patch of herbs nearby, where a cluster of dark green leaves stood, out foxglove, known for its toxic properties. "Gina, dear." "Fetch Inspector Curry," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but firm, "and tell no one to touch the cup." As Gina ran off, Miss Marple examined Finch's hands, noting a faint stain on his fingers, as if he'd handled something pungent. She glanced at the herb patch again, her village wisdom whispering that foxglove, if mishandled, could kill in minutes. The police arrived, and Inspector Curry took charge, cordoning off the garden. Miss Marple lingered, her knitting resumed as a pretext to observe. Sericold, visibly shaken, muttered about Finch's dedication, while Alex paced, his eyes darting to the house. Carrie Louise, supported by Gina, looked frail, as if the weight of Stonegate's secrets was crushing her. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the ledger Finch, as a senior staff member might have known of its existence, or worse, its contents. Determined to find answers, Miss Marple sought out Daniel, the scarred youth who had proven observant. She found him in the workshop, carving a wooden bird with fierce concentration. "Daniel," she said, settling nearby, "I'm sorry about Mr. Finch. He seemed a kind teacher. Did he ever mention anything about the center's records?" Daniel's. Chisel paused, his eyes wary. "He didn't talk much about that, ma'am. But yesterday he was upset. Said he'd found something in the library, old papers, he called them. He was going to tell Mr. Sericold, but then his voice trailed off, and he resumed carving, his movements tense." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly. "Thank you, Daniel. You've been most helpful. Old papers in the library, perhaps tied to the ledger or Grayson's inquiries." Finch's death suggested he'd stumbled onto something dangerous, and the foxglove pointed to a deliberate act. That afternoon, Miss Marple returned to the library, hoping to uncover what Finch had found. The portrait of Lavinia loomed above the fireplace, its frame still askew. She scanned the shelves, her fingers brushing over dusty spines until she noticed a ledger-sized gap in a row of botanical texts. Kneeling, she spotted a faint scuff on the floor, as if something had been dragged. With a glance to ensure she was alone, she pressed the panel beneath the shelf, and a small compartment clicked open, revealing a bundle of papers tied with twine. The papers were financial records, older than the ledger behind the mirror, detailing donations to Stonegates from a trust fund marked RL Trust. The sums were substantial, but several entries showed withdrawals with no explanation, signed by RL and countersigned by E.S. Edger, Sericold. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Ruth and Sericold, linked to missing funds, and now Finch, Hood, likely found these papers, was dead. As she replaced the papers, footsteps approached. It was Gina, her face pale but determined. "Miss Marple, I need to tell you something," she whispered, glancing at the door. "Last night, before the shot, I overheard Mr. Sericold arguing with someone in his office. It was about framing, someone making it look like they'd stolen money. I didn't catch who, but he sounded desperate." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "That's very important, Gina. Did you hear a name or anything else?" Gina shook her head. "Only that. He said, if this comes out, the center's finished. I was too scared to stay." Her voice trembled, but her resolve held. "Thank you, dear," Miss Marple said, patting her hand. "You've done the right thing." Gina's revelation pointed to a plot to deflect blame, perhaps onto Alex or even Grayson. The ledger and papers suggested a scheme of embezzlement, with Finch's death a brutal silencing, determined to connect the foxglove to the killer. Miss Marple visited the garden shed, where gardening tools and supplies were kept. The door was unlocked, and inside she found a small jar labeled herb extract, its contents matching the bitter scent of the shattered cup. Nearby, a pair of gloves bore the same faint stain she'd seen on Finch's fingers. The shed was accessible to staff and residents, but only someone with knowledge of herbs and access to the garden could have prepared the poison. She recalled the herb patch, tended by a groundskeeper named Mr. Harrow, a quiet man with a slight limp from an old injury. His presence in the garden yesterday, his eyes darting toward the group, now took on new significance. Could he be the limping figure Daniel saw, or was the limp a ruse used to mislead? That evening, Miss Marple joined Carrie Louise for a quiet supper, the household subdued by Finch's death. Alex was absent, claiming business in town, while Saracold spoke in clipped tones about tightening security. Miss Marple observed him closely, noting his fidgeting hands a contrast to his usual composure. "Mr. Saracold," she said, her tone mild, "Mr. Finch's death must be a terrible blow. Did he ever mention concerns about the centres?" "Records." Saracold's fork clattered against his plate. "Finch? No, he was focused on teaching. He wouldn't meddle in accounts." His voice was sharp, and Miss Marple noted the lie in his eyes. He knew something, perhaps about the papers Finch had found, as the meal ended. Miss Marple excused herself, her mind on the herb extract and Harrow's limp. She slipped into the garden under the guise of a moonlight stroll, her torch illuminating the herb patch. The foxglove plants showed signs of recent pruning, their leaves clipped with precision. Nearby, a footprint matched the uneven heel from the Uhedja clue tying the garden to Grayson's murder. The chapter closed with Miss Marple in her room, her knitting a quiet rhythm as she reflected. The papers in the library and the foxglove were her triumphs, narrowing the suspects to those with access to the garden and knowledge of the trust fund. Harrow's limp made him a candidate, but Saracold's nervousness and Ruth's initials suggested a broader conspiracy. Tomorrow she would probe Harrow's role and revisit the music room, whose locked door still beckoned. Stonygate's mirrors reflected lies, but Miss Marple's steady gaze was piercing them, one secret at a time. Chapter 6. The Masquerade. All the shadow of death hung over Stonygates. Its weight doubled by the murder of Mr. Grayson and the poisoning of Mr. Finch. Yet, as dusk settled on the third day of Miss Jane Marple's visit, the estate buzzed with an unexpected vibrancy. Carrie Louise, ever the optimist, had insisted on hosting a masquerade ball for the residents and staff, a tradition meant to lift spirits and foster unity among the troubled youths of the rehabilitation centre. Miss Marple, her knitting tucked into a velvet reticule, saw the event as more than a distraction. It was a stage where secrets might slip through the cracks of carefully worn masks. The grand ballroom, rarely used, was transformed. Chandeliers gleamed with candlelight, their glow dancing across walls draped in crimson velvet. The boys, dressed in costumes ranging from makeshift pirate garb to borrowed tailcoats, mingled with staff in elaborate masks of feathers and silk. Gina, radiant in a Venetian harlequin costume, flitted through the crowd, her laughter a bright thread in the tapestry of chatter. Alex Restrick, dashing as a highwayman with a black domino mask, charmed a group of boys with tales of old London. Rogues, Mr. Saracold, in a severe Puritan outfit, stood aloof, his eyes scanning the room as if counting potential threats. Miss Marple, dressed simply in a laced shawl and a silver half-mask, blended into the background, her keen gaze missing nothing. She noted the forced gaiety in Carrie's smile as she greeted guests, her peacock feather mask unable to hide her strain. The recent deaths had shaken the household, and Miss Marple's discoveries the hidden ledger, the foxglove in the garden, and Ruth's initials tied to missing funds pointed to a conspiracy rooted in greed. The ball, with its chaos and anonymity, was the perfect opportunity to observe unguarded moments, as a string quartet struck up a waltz. Miss Marple settled near a refreshment table, her knitting a pretext for eavesdropping. She overheard a young resident, dressed as a jester, whispering to another about a deal gone wrong in the village. his voice tinged with fear. Nearby, Gina danced with a tall figure in a gold-trimmed mask. Their conversation too low to catch, but their body language intimate. Miss Marple's eyes, narrow Gina's ease, suggested familiarity. But the stranger's stiff posture hinted at restraint. The music paused, and Carrie Louise took the stage, her voice warm but fragile. "Tonight, we celebrate new beginnings," she said, raising a glass. "Stony Gates is a place of second chances, and you, our boys, are its heart." The crowd cheered, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance between Alex and Sericold, sharp as a blade. She recalled Gina's overheard snippet about Sericold's plan to frame someone. Could Alex be the target or an accomplice? As the dancing resumed, Miss Marple slipped into the corridor, drawn by a faint clink from the east wing. The halls were dim, the ball's noise fading as she approached the drawing room. Inside, she found a maid, not Elsie, but a younger girl named Molly, adjusting a silver candelabra. Her hands shook, and her mascara, simple black domino, slipped slightly, revealing wide, anxious eyes. "Good evening, Molly," Miss Marple said gently. "You seem troubled. Is the ball too much excitement?" Molly started, nearly dropping the candelabra. "Oh, ma'am, it's not that. It's Mrs. Sericold's necklace. The sapphire one she was wearing, it's gone. I saw her put it on before the ball, but now it's missing." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm afraid they'll think I took it." Miss Marple's mind quickened. A theft during a masquerade was no coincidence. It was a calculated act, cloaked by the night's confusion. "Don't worry, Molly," she said, patting her arm. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Molly hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "Mrs. Sericold was in here before the dancing started, talking to that new guest, the one in the gold mask. She took off the necklace to adjust her mask, left it on the table. I went to fetch more candles, and when I came back, it was gone." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. The gold-masked guest, likely the one dancing with Gina. "Thank you, Molly. Stay here and say nothing for now." She returned to the ballroom, her eyes scanning for the gold mask. The stranger was now near the French doors, slipping onto the terrace with a swiftness that suggested purpose. Following at a discreet distance, Miss Marple stepped into the cool night air. The terrace overlooked the rose garden, its shadows thick under the moonlight. The gold-masked figure stood by, a stone urn, speaking in low tones to a boy in a pirate costume. Miss Marple recognized the boy's Scar Daniel, her observant ally. She couldn't hear their words, but Daniel's tense posture and the stranger's quick gestures suggested a transaction. Before she could approach, a scream pierced the night, coming from the ballroom. Miss Marple hurried back, finding the crowd in disarray. Carrie Louise, her peacock mask askew, stood at the center, her hands bare of jewelry. "My necklace," she cried. "It's been stolen." The music stopped, and Sericold took charge, his voice sharp. "No one leaves until we search everyone." The boys protested, their voices a mix of indignation and fear, while Alex called for calm, his eyes darting to the terrace doors. Miss Marple noted his glance. Did he know something about the thief? Inspector Curry, summoned from his nearby lodgings, arrived to organize a search. Miss Marple, however, had her own plan. She approached Daniel, who had re-entered the ballroom, his pirate costume slightly askew. "Daniel," she said softly, "I saw you on the terrace. Did the man in the gold mask give you anything?" Daniel's scar flushed red, but he met her gaze. "He's not staff, ma'am. Said his name's Victor, a friend of Mr. Restrick's. He gave me a note to deliver to Mr. Sir Reckald, that's all." He hesitated, then pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket. "I didn't read it, I swear." Miss Marple took the note, her fingers steady. It read, "The sapphire is safe. Meet me at the Folly at midnight." No signature, but the handwriting was elegant, feminine. She tucked it away, her mind on the gold-masked Victor, a friend of Alex's, yet unknown to the household and outsider. With a purpose, as the police searched, Miss Marple returned to the drawing-room, where Molly still hovered nervously. The table where Carrie had left the necklace stood beneath a small oval mirror, its surface catching the candlelight. Miss Marple paused, her village instincts tingling. Mirrors again, first in the study, now here. She examined the mirror, noting its slight tilt, much like Lavinia's portrait. A gentle press on the frame revealed a faint click, but no hidden compartment. Instead, she noticed a smudge on the glass, as if someone had pressed against it. Stepping back, she visualized the scene: Carrie removing the necklace, distracted by Victor, the room briefly empty. The thief, masked and swift, could have used the mirror to watch the corridor, ensuring no one approached. But how had they escaped with the necklace unnoticed? Her eyes fell on a velvet curtain near the table, heavy enough to conceal a figure. She parted it, revealing a narrow service door, its latch recently oiled. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. The thief had slipped through the service door, using the mirror to time their exit. She returned to the ballroom, where the search had yielded nothing. Approaching Inspector Curry, she shared her findings in a low voice. "Check the service passage behind the drawing room," she suggested, "and keep an eye on the guest inn." The gold mask, Curry nodded, dispatching a constable to the passage. Minutes later, the officer returned, holding the sapphire necklace, its gems glinting in the candlelight. It had been tucked behind a stack of linens in the passage, hastily hidden. The crowd gasped, and Carrie clutched Gina's arm, relief flooding her face. Miss Marple's gaze found Victor, now unmasked, revealing a sharp-featured man in his 40s, his expression a mix of surprise and irritation. Alex, standing nearby, avoided his eyes, confirming Miss Marple's suspicion of a connection. She approached Daniel, who lingered by the refreshment table. "Daniel, did Victor ask you to do anything else tonight?" He shook his head, but his fingers fidgeted. "Just the note, ma'am." But he was nervous, kept looking at the mirrors, like he expected something. Miss Marple nodded, her triumph secured. The necklace's recovery was a small victory, exposing the service passage and Victor's role as a minor accomplice. The note's feminine handwriting suggested a woman, perhaps Ruth, pulling strings from afar. The mirrors, once again, had played a part, their reflections hiding the thief's movements. The chapter closed with Miss Marple in her room, the note tucked safely in her reticule. The ball had unmasked more than faces. It had revealed a calculated theft and a link to Alex's mysterious friend. Tomorrow, she would probe Victor's identity and Ruth's role, perhaps by confronting Alex directly. The mirrors were deceptive, but Miss Marple's quiet observation was peeling back their secrets, one reflection at a time. Chapter 7. The alibi unravels the morning after the masquerade ball. Stony Gates seemed to hold its breath, as if wary of what secrets the new day might uncover. Miss Jane Marple sat in the conservatory, her knitting needles clicking softly, her mind weaving together the threads of the past few days. Mr. Grayson's murder, Mr. Finch's poisoning, the stolen sapphire necklace recovered from a hidden passage, and the cryptic note from the gold-masked victor, hinting at a woman's involvement possibly. Ruth, Carrie Louise's sister. The mirrors of Stonygates from the study to the drawing room had revealed deception, and Miss Marple sensed the truth lay just beyond the next reflection. The household was subdued, the ball's fleeting cheer eclipsed by the weight of 2 deaths and a theft. At breakfast, Carrie Louise's smile was fragile, her hands clutching her teacup as if for strength. Alex Risteric, his highwayman's charm, dimmed, avoided eye contact, while Mr. Saracold's clipped responses betrayed a growing unease. Gina, ever resilient, tried to rally the group with talk of the boys' theatre rehearsals, but her eyes flickered to Miss Marple, seeking reassurance. Miss Marple returned a gentle nod, her thoughts on Victor's note, "The sapphire is safe. Meet me at the Folly at midnight," and its feminine handwriting. Determined to probe Alex's connection to Victor, Miss Marple sought him out after breakfast. She found him in the estate's small chapel, a quiet stone building tucked behind the rose garden, its stained-glass windows casting jeweled light across the pews. Alex knelt in prayer, his head bowed, but his shoulders were tense, as if he sensed her presence. "Good morning, Alex," Miss Marple said, settling into a pew with her knitting. "This is a peaceful place. Do you come here often?" He looked up, his face a mask of composure, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Not often," Miss Marple just needed a moment to think. "All this tragedy. It's unsettling." His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple caught the slight pause, as if he were choosing his words with care. "Indeed," she replied, her tone mild. "Mr. Grayson's death, Mr. Finch's poisoning, and now the necklace theft. It's a lot for Stonygates to bear. I understand you knew the guest in the gold mask, Victor. A friend, I believe." Alex's fingers tightened on the pew. "Victor, yes, an old acquaintance from London. He's in finance. Thought he might advise on the centre's funding." His smile was tight, and Miss Marple noted the evasion. "He left early this morning. Didn't want to overstay after everything." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. How thoughtful of him. Did he mention anything about a note he gave to Daniel last night? It seemed rather urgent. Alex's composure faltered, his eyes darting to the altar. "A note? I wouldn't know." Victor's always been a bit dramatic. He rose abruptly, smoothing his jacket. "Excuse me, I have business to attend to." As he left, Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. Alex's reaction confirmed her suspicion. He knew more about Victor's role in the note than he admitted. The chapel's quiet offered a moment to reflect. The note's handwriting, the ledgers, initials, and Finch's discovery of old papers all pointed to a conspiracy, with Ruth's name looming large. But Alex's shaky alibi for Grayson's murder, claiming he'd been in his room, was another thread to tug. Miss Marple's next move was to revisit the study, where Grayson's body had been found. Inspector Curry had relaxed the guard, allowing her access under the pretext of assisting with inquiries. The room was unchanged, the mirror above the fireplace still hiding its secret recess, now empty since she'd found the ledger. But her eyes were drawn to the bookshelf, where a row of leather-bound volumes seemed slightly disordered. She ran a finger along the spines, feeling a faint draft from behind. Pressing gently, she heard a soft click, and a panel swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. Her pulse quickened. The passage, barely wide enough for one person, led into darkness, its walls damp and cool. She retrieved her torch, its beam illuminating cobwebs and a faint trail of footprints in the dust small, likely a woman's, and uneven, suggesting a limp. The passage ended at a wooden door, locked but with a keyhole scratched like the music. Rooms. Miss Marple's mind raced. This was the route the limping figure had taken. Perhaps to stage Grayson's murder while creating an alibi. She returned to the study, careful to close the panel, and made a mental note to explore the passages. Exit later. The discovery was a breakthrough, suggesting the killer had used the house's hidden architecture to move unseen. But whose limp matched the footprints? Mr. Harrow, the groundskeeper, had a known injury, but the small size hinted at Ruth or someone mimicking her gait. That afternoon, Miss Marple sought out Gina, finding her in the theatre where the boys were rehearsing The Tempest. The stage was a flurry of painted backdrops and makeshift props, and Gina's laughter as she directed a boy in a Prospero costume was a rare bright note. "Miss Marple, you came," she called, waving her over. "What do you think of our little production?" "It's splendid," Miss Marple said, smiling. "You have a gift for bringing people together, Gina. I wonder, though, have you noticed anyone acting strangely since the ball? Perhaps someone close to Alex?" Gina's smile faded, her eyes thoughtful. "Alex has been odd, more secretive than usual. Last night, after the necklace was found, he was whispering with Mr. Sericold in the library. I didn't hear much, but it sounded like they were arguing about a key, something about it being missing again." Miss Marple's needles paused. "A key, you say? That's very interesting." The music room's lock, the scratched keyhole and the passage keys were becoming a motif in Stonegate's mystery. "Thank you, Gina. You've been most observant." As evening approached, Miss Marple joined Carrie Louise for tea in the drawing room, hoping to probe further about Ruth. The room was cozy, its curtains drawn against the autumn chill, but Carrie's face was drawn, her hands fidgeting with a lace handkerchief. "Jane, I can't bear this darkness over Stonegates," she said. "First Grayson, then Finch, and now the necklace. Do you think they're connected?" "I'm certain of it," Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle but firm. "Carrie, tell me more about Ruth. You said she's distant, but has she ever been involved with the center's finances? Perhaps through a trust?" Carrie's eyes widened, then softened with sadness. "Ruth set up a trust years ago, after our father died. It was meant to support Stonegates, but she's always been private about it. She visited last spring, asked about our accounts, but I thought it was just sisterly concern." Her voice trembled. "Do you think she's involved?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "I think many things, Carrie, but nothing certain yet. Ruth's trust, linked to the ledger and papers, was a critical piece, but her absence from Stonegates raised questions. Was she orchestrating events from afar, or was someone using her name?" Determined to test Alex's alibi, Miss Marple visited his room under the guise of borrowing a book. He was out, and the door was unlocked. Careless oversight. Inside, she found a desk cluttered with papers, including a letter in the same feminine handwriting as Victor's note. It was brief. "Keep the key safe," while Miss Marple's heart quickened. The key, again, and Ruth's initial. She replaced the letter, noting a faint scent of lavender unusual for Alex's masculine room. That night, Miss Marple lingered in the library, pretending to read while watching the household retire. Sericold passed by, his face pale, and she caught a fragment of his muttered words. "Can't let it out." She followed at a distance, her steps silent, and saw him pause at the music room door, testing the lock. He didn't enter, but his furtive glance confirmed her suspicions. The music room was central to the mystery. As midnight approached, Miss Marple returned to the study, torch in hand, and re-entered the hidden passage. This time, she followed it to its end, emerging in a dusty closet near the west wing. The footprints were clearer here, and a scrap of fabric lavender scented caught on a nail suggested a woman's presence. The passage connected the study to the music room, explaining how the killer had moved unseen during Grayson's murder. The chapter closed with Miss Marple back in her room, her knitting a quiet rhythm as she reflected. The hidden passage was her triumph, a concrete link between the murders and the music room's secrets. Alex's shaky alibi, Ruth's letter, and the lavender scent pointed to a woman's involvement, but whether it was Ruth herself or a clever impersonation remained unclear. Tomorrow she would confront Sirocco about the key and explore the music room, whose locked door held the next piece of the puzzle. Stonygate's shadows were parting, and Miss Marple's steady gaze was illuminating the truth, one step at a time. Chapter 8. The garden's confession. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rose garden of Stonygates, where the scent of late blooms mingled with the lingering chill of tragedy. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting tucked into a basket, stood by the herb patch where Mr. Finch had met his untimely end, poisoned by foxglove. The weight of two murders, Grayson's shooting and Finch's poisoning, long with the sapphire necklace theft, pressed heavily on the estate. Yet Miss Marple's mind was alight with the threads she'd woven. The hidden ledger, the secret passage connecting the study to the music room, and the lavender-scented letter in Alex's room, signed with Ruth's initial. The discovery of the passage had confirmed her suspicion that the killer moved unseen. But the question of who and why remained, tantalizingly out of reach. Determined to probe the groundskeeper, Mr. Harrow's possible role, given his limp and access to the toxic herbs, Miss Marple lingered in the garden after breakfast. The household was subdued, the boys attending classes under temporary tutors, while Carrie Louise withdrew to her private parlour, her optimism frayed. Alex Restorick, his charm increasingly strained, had left for town on vague business, and Mr. Seracolt's clipped demeanour suggested he was guarding more than the centre's accounts. Gina, ever watchful, had promised to keep an eye on the boys, leaving Miss Marple free to investigate. The herb patch, tucked behind a low stone wall, was meticulously tended, its rows of sage and rosemary interspersed with the deadly foxglove. Miss Marple knelt, her eyes scanning for signs of tampering. A few stems showed fresh cuts, their edges still green, confirming her suspicion that the poison had been recently harvested. Nearby, a gardening trowel bore a faint stain, matching the bitter scent she'd noted on Finch's hands. She wrapped the trowel in her handkerchief, intending to show it to Inspector Curry, who was still on the estate. Sifting through Grayson's papers. As she rose, Mr. Harrow approached, his weathered face set in a frown. His limp was pronounced, favouring his left leg, and his patched jacket hung loosely on his frame. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice gruff but polite. "You're taking a keen interest in my herbs." "They're beautifully kept," Miss Marple replied, her tone disarming. "You must know them well, Mr. Harrow. I suppose you're careful with the foxglove. It's quite dangerous, isn't it?" His eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "Aye, it's deadly if you're careless. I keep it for the look of it, not for use. The boys know to steer clear." His fingers twitched, and Miss Marple noted a faint tremble, as if her question had struck a nerve. "Have you noticed anyone else tending the herbs?" she asked, her voice light. "Perhaps someone curious about their properties?" Harrow hesitated, his gaze flickering to the house. Can't say I have, ma'am. But I'm not always here. The shed's open to staff, and some of the boys sneak in, thinking they're clever. He turned away, busying himself with a rosebush, but Miss Marple caught the evasion in his tone. Harrow knew something, or feared he did, determined to press. Further, Miss Marple visited the gardening shed, where she'd found the herb extract linked to Finch's death. The jar was still there, its label faded but legible. She examined the shelves, noting a small notebook tucked behind a stack of seed packets. Its pages listed herb inventories, with foxglove marked as reserved in a looping script feminine, like the note from Victor. A date beside it matched the day before Finch's death. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The notebook was a clue, tying the poison to someone with access to the shedand, possibly the same woman behind the necklace theft. As she pocketed the notebook, footsteps crunched outside. She slipped behind a stack of crates, her small frame hidden in the shadows. The door creaked open, and Mr. Sericold entered, his spectacles glinting in the dim light. He moved to the shelves, his hands searching with a furtiveness that belied his usual composure. Finding nothing, he muttered, "She must have taken it," and left as quickly as he'd come. Miss Marple emerged, her mind racing. Presence in the shed, his cryptic words, she suggested he was searching for evidence. Perhaps the same notebook she now held. The pronoun pointed to Ruth, or someone posing as her, but his agitation hinted at deeper involvement. Was he protecting the center, or himself? That afternoon, Miss Marple sought out Gina, finding her in the library, sorting scripts for the boys. Play. The portrait of Lavinia loomed above, its frame still askew, a reminder of the secrets it might hide. "Gina," Miss Marple said, settling beside her, "you've been wonderfully observant. Have you seen Mr. Harrow acting oddly, perhaps near the garden shed?" Gina's brow furrowed. "Mr. Harrow, he's always grumbling, but yesterday I saw him talking to a woman near the gate. She was older, with a scarf over her hair, and she limped a bit. I thought she was a visitor, but she left quickly when I approached." Miss Marple's needles paused. A limping woman, not part of the household, seen with Harrow. "Did you hear anything they said?" "Only a bit," Gina admitted. "Something about keeping the herbs ready and no more mistakes. It didn't make sense then, but now." Her voice trailed off, her eyes wide with realization. Double quotes, "Thank you, Gina," Miss Marple said, patting her hand. The limping woman, the notebooks, script, and Harrow's unease formed a pattern. She needed to confront the groundskeeper, but subtly, to avoid alerting the true culprit. That evening, Miss Marple joined Carrie Louise for a walk along the estate's orchard, hoping to probe further about Ruth. The trees were heavy with apples, their scent sweet in the twilight air. Carrie's steps were slow, her face etched with worry. "Jane, I feel as if Stonegates is unraveling," she said. "First Grayson, then Finch, and now all this talk of keys and secrets. Do you think Ruth could truly be involved?" Miss Marple chose her words carefully. "People can surprise us, Carrie, even those we love." Did Ruth ever mention the herb garden or Mr. Harrow? Carrie shook her head. Not directly, but during her last visit, she was curious about the grounds, asked about the plants we grow. I thought it was just idle chatter. Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple sensed a sisterly bond strained by doubt as they returned to the house. Miss Marple detoured to the garden, her torch illuminating the herb patch. She found Harrow there, pruning lavender with a distracted air. "Mr. Harrow," she said, her tone gentle but firm, I found a notebook in the shed, listing Foxglove as reserved. Do you know who might have written it? Harrow's shears froze, his face paling. I don't know about any notebook, ma'am. I just tend the plants. His voice was tight, and he turned away, but not before Miss Marple caught a glimpse of fear in his eyes. Perhaps a woman you spoke to yesterday. She pressed, her voice soft, near the gate with a limp. Harrow's hands shook, and he dropped the shears. You've got it wrong, he stammered. She was just asking about roses. Said she was a friend of Mrs. Sericold's sister. I didn't know her name. He grabbed his tools and hurried off, his limp more pronounced in his haste. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. Harrow's reaction was her triumph, a confession of sorts that tied the limping woman to Ruth and to the foxglove. The notebook's handwriting matched the note from Victor, suggesting a single orchestrator behind the theft and Finch's murder. But was it Ruth herself, or someone using her name to sow confusion? Back in her room, Miss Marple examined the notebook, its pages a catalogue of intent. The foxglove entry was dated, deliberate, and the lavender scent on the letter in Alex's room echoed the garden's aroma. She recalled Sericold's furtive search in the shed had he been looking for this notebook, fearing it exposed his role. Or was he protecting Ruth, whose trust fund was at the heart of the ledger's secrets? The chapter closed with Miss Marple at her window, the moonlight casting shadows across stony gates. The notebook was her mini-resolution, a tangible link between the garden and the murders. Tomorrow she would confront Sericold about his shed visit and probe Ruth's visit last spring, perhaps through Carrie's memories. The music room's locked door still beckoned, its key a puzzle she was close to solving. Stonygate's mirrors reflected lies, but Miss Marple's quiet persistence was unraveling them, one confession at a time. Chapter 9. The trap is set. The air at Stonygate's was thick with suspicion, as if the very walls whispered of the secrets they guarded. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the morning room with her knitting, felt the weight of the past week. Murder in the study, Finch's poisoning by Foxglove, the sapphire necklace theft, and the hidden passage linking the study to the music room. Her discoveries, the ledger of embezzled funds, the lavender-scented letter tying Ruth to Alex, and the groundskeeper, Harrow's nervous confession about a limping woman had tightened the web of deceit. Yet the killer remained elusive, cloaked by the estate's mirrors and half-truths. Today, Miss Marple resolved to force their hand. The household gathered for breakfast, their faces etched with strain. Carrie Louise, her optimism waning, picked at her toast, while Alex Ristarik's forced cheer felt like a cracked veneer. Mr. Sericold, his spectacles glinting with unease, spoke little, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting an interruption. Gina, ever vigilant, caught Miss Marple's gaze, her nod a silent acknowledgement of their shared mission to uncover the truth. Miss Marple's plan was risky but simple. Spread a rumor of a witness to Grayson's murder, one who knew too much, and watch the killer react. After breakfast, Miss Marple sought out Daniel, the scarred youth whose keen observations had proven invaluable. She found him in the orchard, polishing apples with a rag, his solitude a perfect opportunity. "Daniel," she said, her tone warm but deliberate, "you've been a great help. I need you to do something for me, but it must stay between us." His eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "What is it, ma'am?" "I want you to tell a few of the boys quietly. Mind you that someone saw the person who shot Mr. Grayson. Say they're afraid to come forward, but will speak to the police soon. Don't say who, just let the story spread." She watched his face, noting his quick understanding. "All right," he said, his voice low. "But why?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Sometimes, Daniel, the truth needs a little nudge to show itself." She handed him a shilling for his trouble, knowing a small reward would ensure his discretion. As he pocketed it, she added, "Be careful. Say nothing to Mr. Harrow or Mr. Sa." Returning to the house, Miss Marple joined Gina in the theatre, where the boys were painting backdrops for The Tempest. The air was thick with turpentine and laughter, a brief respite from Stonygate's gloom. Gina, in a paint-smeared apron, waved her over. "Miss Marple, you're just in time to see our shipwreck scene. What do you think?" "It's splendid," Miss Marple replied, her eyes scanning the room. "Gina, have you heard any talk among the boys about the murders? Rumors can spread quickly." Gina lowered her brush, her voice soft. "Some of the boys think Mr. Sericold's hiding something. They say he's been locking himself in his office late at night, burning papers. I saw smoke from his window yesterday, but I didn't dare ask." Her eyes widened. "Do you think he's destroying evidence?" "People burn papers for many reasons," Miss Marple said, her tone neutral but her mind racing. Sericold's actions, paired with his shed visit, suggested he feared exposure perhaps of the ledger's secrets or Ruth's involvement. "Keep your ears open, dear. You're very good at noticing things." As the day wore on, Miss Marple's rumour took root. She overheard whispers among the boys in the corridors, their voices hushed but urgent. "Someone saw the shooter. They're telling the police tomorrow." By luncheon, the tension in the household was palpable. Alex's smile was strained, and Sericold's hands shook as he poured tea. Miss Marple watched, her knitting a steady rhythm, waiting for the killer to betray themselves. That afternoon, she visited the garden shed again, hoping to find more clues about the foxglove. The notebook was gone, likely taken by Sericold, but she noticed a small vial tucked behind a spade, its label reading "Foxglove Tincture." The handwriting matched the notebook's looping script, reinforcing her suspicion of a woman's involvement. She pocketed the vial, careful to leave no trace, and stepped outside, where she spotted Harrow near the herb patch. His limp pronounced as he raked leaves. "Mr. Harrow," she called, her voice gentle, "you seem troubled. Is there something you'd like to share about the woman you met at the gate?" Harrow's rake paused, his face paling. "I told you, ma'am, she was just asking about roses. I don't know her name." His voice cracked, and he turned away, but Miss Marple caught a glint of sweat on his brow. Her rumour was working. Harrow was nervous, perhaps fearing the witness knew of his meeting. As evening approached, Miss Marple joined Carrie Louise in the drawing-room, where the fire cast flickering shadows. Carrie's face was drawn, her hands twisting a laced shawl. "Jane, the boys are whispering about a witness," she said. "Is it true? Do you know who it is?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her serene expression. "Rumours are like weeds, Carrie. They spread quickly and reveal where the ground is soft. We'll see what comes of it." She said no more, but her trap was set, the bait laid for the killer to bite Dot. At dusk, a cry shattered the quiet. Miss Marple, in the library, reviewing Grayson's notebook, hurried toward the sound, which came from the west wing. She found a crowd gathered outside the music room, where Daniel lay slumped against the locked door, clutching his arm. Blood seeped through his sleeve, and his face was pale but defiant. "Someone pushed me," he gasped. "Tried to stab Miran off when I yelled." Gina, kneeling beside him, tore a strip from her scarf to bind the wound. "Miss Marple, he's hurt. We need a doctor." Miss Marple's heart raced, but her voice was calm. Stay with him, Gina. I'll fetch help. She noted the music room's scratched lock untouched since her last visit, and a glint of metal on the floor, a small knife, its blade stained red. The attack on Daniel was no accident. Her rumor had provoked the killer, who feared he was. The witness, Inspector Curry, summoned from his quarters, took charge, sending for a doctor and securing the knife. Miss Marple drew him aside, her voice low. Inspector, Daniel was targeted because of a rumor I spread about a witness to Grayson's murder. The killer took the bait, believing Daniel knew too much. Curry's eyes widened, but he nodded. Clever, Miss Marple. Risky, but clever. Any idea who it was? Not yet, she said, but the knife and the music room are significant. Check for fingerprints, and watch Mr. Harrow closely. His limp matches a clue, but he may not act alone. She handed him the foxglove vial, explaining its discovery. This ties to Finch's poisoning. Someone with access to the shed is involved. As the doctor tended Daniel, Miss Marple questioned him gently. Did you see who attacked you, Daniel? Anything at all? He winced, his voice weak. It was dark, ma'am. They wore a cloak, moved fast, but I think it was a woman. I heard a rustle like a skirt and smelled lavender. His eyes met hers, and she saw fear mixed with trust. Thank you, Daniel, she said, patting his hand. The lavender scent, the feminine handwriting, the limping woman Ruth's shadow loomed. Larger, but Miss Marple suspected a deception. A woman's cloak could be worn by anyone, and the lavender was too convenient. Like a planted clue. That night, Miss Marple joined Carrie Louise for a late tea. The house quiet, save for the doctor's footsteps. Carrie's hands trembled as she poured. Jane, Daniel's attack, it's too much. Is it because of your rumor? Miss Marple nodded, her tone gentle. I'm sorry, Carrie. It was necessary to stir the truth. Someone fears exposure, and Daniel's safety is my priority now. She paused, choosing her words. Did Ruth ever wear lavender perfume during her visits? Carrie frowned. Lavrue, yes, it's her favorite, but she hasn't been here since spring. Could someone else use it? Her voice held a mix of hope and dread, and Miss Marple sensed her fear for her sister. As midnight approached, Miss Marple sat in her room, her knitting a quiet rhythm. The attack on Daniel was her triumph, proof her trap had worked. The knife, the lavender, and the music room pointed to a desperate killer, perhaps Ruth or someone framing her. Tomorrow, she would press Sericold about his shed visit and explore the music room's secrets. Using the passage, if needed. Mirrors were cracking, and Miss Marple's steady gaze was close to revealing the face behind them. Chapter 10. The final reflection. The morning sun bathed Stonegates in a golden glow, but the warmth could not dispel the chill of its secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat in her guest room, her knitting needle still, her mind a tapestry of clues woven. Over the past week, Grayson's murder, Finch's poisoning, the sapphire necklace theft, the hidden passage, the ledger of embezzled funds, and the attack on Daniel, provoked by her cunning rumor of a witness. The lavender-scented letter, the foxglove tincture, and the limping woman tied to Ruth, Carrie Louise's sister, pointed to a conspiracy rooted in greed and betrayal. Today, Miss Marple resolved to unmask the killer, bringing mirrors of deception into sharp focus. The household gathered in the drawing room for a late breakfast, their faces etched with exhaustion. Carrie Louise, her optimism nearly extinguished, sipped tea with trembling hands. Alex Restrick, His charm, eroded by suspicion, avoided eye contact, while Mr. Serecold's clipped responses betrayed a man on edge. Gina, her resilience waning, clung to hope, her eyes seeking Miss Marple's reassurance. Daniel, his arm bandaged from the previous night's attack, sat quietly among the boys, his scar a stark reminder of the danger lurking within the estate. Miss Marple knew the time had come for a reckoning. She had shared her findings with Inspector Curry, who agreed to her plan, a gathering to confront the household with the truth, using the ledger and the passage as evidence. She requested everyone's presence in the study at noon, framing it as a discussion of recent events. The stage was set, and Miss Marple's quiet authority ensured compliance. As the clock struck 12, the study filled with tense faces. Carrie Louise sat by the fireplace, the ornate mirror above reflecting the room's unease. Alex leaned against the desk, his fingers drumming nervously, while Serecold adjusted his spectacles, his gaze darting to the door. Gina stood by Daniel, protective, and Mr. Harrow lingered at the back, his limp pronounced. Inspector Curry and a constable stood ready, their presence a silent warning. Miss Marple began, her voice gentle but commanding. "Thank you for coming. Stonygates has endured great tragedy: Mr. Grayson's murder, Mr. Finch's poisoning, a stolen necklace, and an attack on young Daniel. These are not random acts, but threads in a single web, woven with deceit." She held up the ledger, its pages worn but damning. This was hidden behind the mirror in this very room, detailing embezzled funds from a trust marked R.L. Ruth Levinson, Carrie's sister. Large sums were siphoned, signed by R.L. and countersigned by Mr. Serecold. Gasps rippled through the room, and Carrie's face paled. Serecold stood, his voice sharp. "That's preposterous. I never touched those funds. Ruth managed the trust alone." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Yet your initials are here, Mr. Serecold, and you were seen searching the garden shed. Perhaps for this." She produced the foxglove tincture vial, its label in the same feminine script as the note in Alex's room. "This poisoned Mr. Finch, who had found papers linking the trust to missing money." Turning to Alex, she continued, "You, Mr. Restrick, knew Victor, who passed a note about the stolen necklace, written in the same hand. You claimed he was a friend, but your secrecy suggests otherwise." Alex's jaw tightened. "Victor was just a contact. I had nothing to do with any theft or murder." Miss Marple nodded, her tone serene. "Perhaps, but someone used a hidden passage." She pressed the mirror's seam, revealing the recess and the passage beyond. "This connects the study to the music room, allowing the killer to move unseen during Grayson's murder, creating an alibi." The room fell silent, eyes wide. Miss Marple turned to Harrow. "Mr. Harrow, you met a limping woman at the gate, who spoke of keeping the herbs ready. You feared she was tied to the poison, didn't you?" Harrow's face crumpled, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know what she was planning," she said. "She was Ruth, asked me to prepare the foxglove for a remedy. I thought it was harmless." Carrie gasped, tears welling. "Ruth, my sister. Jane, it can't be." Miss Marple's expression softened, but her voice held firm. "It can, and it is. Ruth Levinson orchestrated these crimes, driven by a grudge against you, carry over an inheritance she believed was hers. She set up the trust to fund Stonygates, but siphoned its wealth, using Mr. Serecold's name to cover her tracks. Grayson, hired to audit the accounts, uncovered her scheme. Finch found the old papers, and both paid with their lives. She turned to the mirror, her reflection steady. Ruth used the passage to shoot Grayson, staging it to look like a failed attempt on Mr. Sericold. She poisoned Finch with foxglove, knowing his discovery threatened her. The necklace theft was a distraction, meant to sow chaos, and Daniel's attack was her desperate attempt to silence a supposed witness. Sericold's voice broke. But Ruth hasn't been here since spring. How could she? She was here. Miss Marple interrupted, producing the lavender-scented letter. This, found in Alex's room, matches the note from Victor and the Shed's notebook. Ruth returned in secret, using a limp perhaps real, perhaps feigned to mislead. She wore lavender to mark her presence, a signature of her deceit. Gina's voice trembled. But why, Miss Marple? Why hurt so many? Miss Marple's eyes softened. Greed and resentment, dear. Ruth believed Stonegates should have been hers. She stole its funds to ruin it, framing Mr. Sericold to deflect blame. But she underestimated the power of observation. The door burst open, and Inspector Curry's constable entered, escorting a woman in a dark scarf, her face pale but defiant. It was Ruth, her eyes blazing as she faced the room. "You've no proof," she spat. "This is slander." Miss Marple held up the ledger, the vial, and the letter. "These, and Daniel's testimony of your lavender sent during his attack, are proof enough. The passage's footprints match your shoes, Ruth. You hid in plain sight, but mirrors reflect. Truth as well as lies." Ruth's defiance crumbled, and she sank into a chair, her voice a whisper. "I wanted what was mine. Father left Stonegates to carry, but I built the trust. When Grayson started digging, I had to stop him. Finch was nosy, and the boy." She trailed off, tears streaming. Carrie Louise rose, her face a mix of grief and resolve. "Ruth, how could you? This place was for healing, not hate." Inspector Curry stepped forward, handcuffs ready. "Ruth Levinson, you're under arrest for murder and theft." As she was led away, the room exhaled, the weight of secrets lifting. Miss Marple sat with Carrie Louise that afternoon in the conservatory, the air soft with the scent of ferns. The boys were back at their classes, Gina directing their play with renewed vigor, and Alex and Sericold, cleared of guilt, began repairing the center's finances. Daniel, recovering, had thanked Miss Marple with a shy smile, his trust in her unshaken. "Jane," Carrie said, her voice steady at last, "how did you see what we missed?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. "People are like my village, Carrie. They repeat patterns, greed, fear, love." Ruth's resentment was a thread I'd seen before, in St. Mary Mead's quarrels and betrayals. The mirrors, the passage, the lavender, they were her mistakes, reflecting her guilt. Carrie smiled, tears in her eyes. "You've saved Jane, will you stay for the play?" Miss Marple chuckled. "I wouldn't miss it, but then I must return home. My geraniums need me." As evening fell, Miss Marple stood by her window, the estate quiet at last. The music room's lock, the ledger, the passage all had yielded to her quiet persistence. Stonegates was healing, its mirrors now reflecting hope. She packed her knitting, her heart light with the satisfaction of a mystery solved, and turned her thoughts to the train back to St. Mary Mead, where simpler puzzles awaited.